Hello, guys and gals, and welcome to another episode of Monster Families. Today, we're going to be going over the monsters known as the Itchies, the Swarms, the Hell Bugs, the evil like flying ick. They're definitely gross, and not only are they gross, but they also drain stamina, which normally stamina is not an issue, like in most of the game. But when you're fighting these guys, they make stamina an issue because they steal all your stamina away, and they're very rude about it. This is not just one bug. This is like a swarm of bugs. As you can clearly see, they seem to be made up of like individual bug like particles. I'm assuming it's supposed to be very reminiscent of locusts. If you guys have never seen locusts, locusts are an actual real thing that used to completely devastate crops and all sorts of other things back in the olden days. And so I'm guessing that that is kind of what these are designed around. And you might be thinking, well, what damage can a bug do? Well, the answer to that question is a lot if there's a lot of them. Like when you see a picture like this, imagine, if you will, like death by a million cuts. You have a bug who takes a little tiny bite out of you. It's not that big of a deal. It itches for a while and it'll heal later. But imagine 10,000 of these bugs take a little bite out of you, or 100,000 of these bugs take a little bite out of you. It doesn't eventually, take that many bugs to just simply eat the entire person that is left. Now, some of these are eating crops, some of them are eating animals, some of them are eating all sorts of things. It depends on the specific species of bug. Ants kind of do the same thing as well, but they don't, well, not all ants fly, but some of them do. But basically, like when it comes to these locusts, essentially numbers is the power here, right? So you have massive numbers, and the numbers of these little tiny insects can do massive amounts of damage. I always thought these bugs, like in Diablo 2, were kind of interesting because I always thought to myself, like, how would you even fight these things as a melee character? You know what I mean? Like, would you turn your blade sideways so that you could, like, because you wouldn't want to have, like, the cutting edge, like, swinging the cutting edge, because what, you might hit like a couple bugs. But like if you turned your blade sideways like a fly swatter, you could like swat with your blade, and maybe you might actually hit or kill more of them by swatting with your blade. And it sounds kind of silly to say it that way, but if you were fighting a large amount of bugs like this who were trying to kill you, swatting them with the sword might actually be more effective than the latter. You could also potentially take off your shield and just like take your shield and just start like going like this and just smacking them into the dirt. I mean, who knows? There's definitely some interesting ways that you could potentially combat like bugs like this, which of course is outside of the realm of the game. Because when you're in the game, you just take one swing and the whole swarm gets hit by your attack, which of course is silly. Now, most spellcasters don't have any trouble with these swarms, and it really comes down to the fact that the swarms were designed in such a way that, well, they're meant to like counter melee characters. And every now and then you see that little sparkle that appears inside the pack. That means that the swarms can deadly strike, which means they do double damage during that particular attack. Now, swarms are almost always immune to physical damage. And let's take a look at the swarm sheet here. They do go by a lot of different names. They go by Itchies, they go by black locusts, they go by hell swarms, and they generally tend to be almost direct counters to physical damage characters. And we're going to talk about what you can do to potentially bypass these monsters, how you can deal with them in various ways, and why they're not really that difficult. Now, the fact that they drain stamina is kind of annoying, but like usually if you're fighting them, you're standing still, or you're mostly standing still anyway, so you don't really have to worry about it. When I say they are direct counters to melee characters, they are direct counters to melee characters. They are designed in a way that melee characters literally generally have the worst time with these monsters. You can see that they have no ability to mana leech or life leech. This is because they have a drain effectiveness of 0. They're essentially the same as skeletons in this regard, which means that it doesn't matter if they are immune to physical or not. It doesn't matter whether you can break their immune to physical or you apply amplify damage, or if you have 10,000 life leech, you cannot life leech them because they have a drain effectiveness of 0. Now, the only way that you could potentially drain from them is life tap, which doesn't technically life leech. It actually is a different form of leech. But even if you life tap them, you still have to break their physical resistance so you can actually deal physical damage and get life back. So they're designed in a way that technically kind of circumvents melees, and it's really annoying. But how can you potentially deal with them as a melee character anyway? Well, the interesting thing about these monsters is that number one, they don't really have a lot of HP. You can see right here that in Hell difficulty, they only have 772 to 2058, upwards to a maximum of 2288 HP, which basically means they have like no hit points. Now, this is kind of odd though because they feel like they're really tanky as a melee character, and the reason why they feel tanky is because even in normal difficulty they have as low as 60% physical damage resistance, and even up to 90% in normal difficulty as hell swarms, which means that 90% of your physical damage is essentially being taken and thrown away. In hell difficulty, they're almost always immune to physical damage, and in nightmare difficulty, they're very close to immune. And with anything like stone skin, for instance, they definitely go immune. So you generally can't do physical damage to them, which is one of the biggest problems. Now you can apply amplified damage or decrepify if you've got it, but one of the easiest ways to deal with them is just to not do physical damage. Use anything that does elemental damage. Gimmer Shred. Add elemental damage charms in your inventory. Crescent moons, holy freeze, holy fire, holy shock, all sorts of various ways that you can apply elemental damage to your melee attacks, and they'll die really easy because they don't have much HP to begin with, and on top of that, they don't have any resistances either. They have no magical resistance, they have no fire resistance, they have no cold resistance, they have no poison resistance, and they have very limited lightning resistance, and only the Hell Swarm has lightning resistance of 70% in Hell difficulty. So for the most part, if you deal any elemental damage to them, you can usually kill them relatively quickly. Gimmer Shred, Baronera Star. There's tons of various little weapons, like trying to think of like some of the lower level ones, but like Nord's Tenderizer, Lightsaber, Azure Wrath. There's like hundreds of little weapons that have like 200 to 400 to an element on it, right? Well, if they only have like 772 to 2000 HP, that means you can usually kill them within like 2, maybe 3 strikes with any elemental damage weapon. And they're designed in such a way that any elemental damage essentially bypasses them almost entirely, but physical damage is almost completely hard stopped in every way, shape, and form. They don't want you to leech from them. They don't want you to dish out physical damage to them. And even if you do dish out physical damage to them, it's going to be depleted tremendously. Like even if you put amp on them, if they're immune to it, they're going to practically bring it down to nothing. If you use amp and a Bone Sunder together, you can usually go through them pretty quickly. In my case, for instance, my character is a lightning character. So I actually dish out mainly lightning damage through charms and also crescent moons. And so if I were to attack these monsters right now that are immune to physical, I can pretty much just annihilate them from existence. And it really just comes down to the fact that I'm dishing out almost no physical damage whatsoever. Now, when they die, they do leave like little weird little bug piles on the ground. The red ones kind of remind me of chiggers. If you don't know if you remember chiggers, I think they have another name, but that's what we used to call them. Chiggers are these like evil little red like ticks. And the red ones kind of look like those. They're like tiny little itty bitty bugs. And they tend to be on bricks and other things, and they're unique in that if you ever get a chigger on you for whatever reason, you will know and you will remember for the rest of your life because they don't just bite in one place. They tend to like roam around and they bite all over. They literally will just like, they're like, let me go over here, bite. And then they're like, let me go over here, bite. Let me go over here, bite. Let me go over here, bite. And like one chigger can literally bite you like 10, 20, 30 times before you realize he's there. I hate the little things. They're absolutely evil little bastards. And these guys remind me of those. Generally, though, they're not really much of a threat. I think this is also kind of important to talk about with these guys, is that they don't really like pose much of a threat in this game. They tend to stop melee characters because of their immune to physical nature. And in fact, one of the nastier ones is the ones that are in Far Oasis in the maggot layer, because the maggot layer, of course, is a linear straight line progression where you really can't bypass things unless you have like leap or teleport or something. So when you're in Far Oasis and you go down into the maggot layer, a lot of the times the bugs like the Itchies and whatnot that you'll encounter in the maggot layer can stop your progress almost entirely. Now, aside from elemental damage, there actually is another way that you can bypass Itchies, and it has to do with the open wounds effect. So, open wounds is an interesting mechanic in Diablo 2 because it is not technically physical damage. And because it is not technically physical damage, it will still dish out damage to a target as long as you damage the target first. So, this is the important thing when it comes to open wounds. Open wounds requires that the monster have a wound to take advantage of in some way, shape, or form, which basically means you need to do at least one damage to the target, and that's it. Once the target has been hit one time for one damage, the open wounds effect will actually work on locusts even if they're immune to physical and you don't have any amplify damage or anything on them. Now, it's kind of hard for me to do this because I'm currently murdering them ridiculously easy with these lightning damage charms. Let's actually just drop a bunch of these on the ground real quick. And I think I got like... can't even use my weapon if I do that. Alright, so as you can see, you see the monster's HP going down? That's because the open wound effect is applying to the Black Locust even though he's immune to physical. And this is literally one of the easiest ways to deal with these guys because they have such low HP, is to get any charm whatsoever that does any damage type other than physical. It can be poison, lightning, fire, it can be cold. You could potentially have a tiny bit of like magic damage on a weapon or something. Like, it doesn't really matter. As long as you can do at least one damage to the target and you have open wounds of any type, you can bypass the physical immunity of these monsters. Now, normally it might take a relatively long time to kill a monster with open wounds in that particular way, but because the monsters, these Itchies, have such low life, the open wounds effect will actually absolutely destroy them. There's a lot of really easy ways to get access to open wounds too. Like, for instance, you could use one of the cheapest versions, which is, of course, Malice. Malice is only Ith-El-Eth. It's one of the dirt cheapest rune words that you could potentially make, and you can utilize this at a very low level, only level 15, and it has 100% chance of open wounds. Also includes prevent monster heal too, to keep them from being able to regenerate entirely, which means that if you utilize this to attack one of the physical immune monsters, they will slowly die just simply from the open wounds. As long as you can dish out at least one damage to the target to allow the open wounds to work. Now, open wounds damage scales with level, so as if you're a low-level character, you get less damage. You can see here that the damage on the open wounds goes up and down depending on your level. So as you get to a much higher level, you get way higher damage output. So do keep that in mind as you're trying to struggle bust your way through Maggot Lair. I've definitely had to do this on occasion. Like, for instance, when I was on my smiter, the smiter cannot actually do elemental damage. So I had to find another way to bypass the physical immunes in that particular regard. Moving on to like more like interesting stuff here is I was trying to see if the swarms existed anywhere else besides Act 2 and Act 3, but I couldn't find any. Normally, some of the monsters have a guest type, and there is a guest type for like those specific monsters in Act 5, but according to this list, there is no itchy swarm guest type on the list, so I guess the swarms only exist within Act 2 and Act 3. I know they're not in Act 4, and I know they're not in Act 1, and surprisingly, they don't exist in Act 5 either, unless they happen to be not on the guest list, but actually in the game. Which, believe it or not, when we were doing the baboon earlier, I did actually find out that there was one version of the baboon which did not exist on the guest list, but was in fact in the game, known as the Night Marauder, which exists inside of Nelothak's temple. So maybe I could be wrong, and there might be a swarm that exists somewhere in Act 5. It's just not on the list. Overall, they're definitely not like the most crazy monsters to deal with. When you do find them in Act 3, they're generally spread out and relatively easy to either avoid or kill. In Act 2 is the only place where really the physical damage characters are forced to deal with these characters. And there's really a myriad of ways that you can potentially deal with them due to their extremely low health and extremely low resistances. They do have some additional effects. So the Hell Swarms specifically, which are the strongest variation of them, do have additional fire damage in Nightmare and Hell difficulty, which could potentially bypass like some of your resistances. Like for instance, if you're just fresh to hell and you're still in the negatives in fire resistance for whatever reason because you don't have the appropriate gear that you need, the extra fire damage that these guys do could be enough to overwhelm you if you're running in the negative on fire. Overall, though, just not really that big of a threat. Usually, though, the main issue with these guys is their swarming potential. So speaking of that specifically, you noticed earlier when I was in I believe it was Kuros Bazaar, and I was messing around with all of those Itchies, they tend to swarm you relatively effectively. Now, even though they don't necessarily do enough damage themselves to kill you relatively quickly, if you're in a zone that has other monsters, like ranged monsters or casters, anything that is going to be able to hit you besides the Itchies, they can potentially lock you in place relatively easily, which is something that I would definitely be wary of because there are so many of them and it's kind of hard to see exactly like where the out is because of their big, like, I don't like balloonish kind of nature. Let me see if I can find another pack of them real quick. I think it was Kuros, but Upper Kuros. I see nothing. I see nothing. It's kind of strange too because you don't always see them here, and it's actually kind of rare to see them. But when you do see them, they tend to be extremely high in number to the point where they almost like blot out the surface of the sun, so to speak. Which I'm pretty sure that means that they're not in this specific zone. I love killing them on my elemental characters, though. I tell you that much. Yeah, I think the elemental characters have the easiest time with them, and they don't even think about them. Like if you're a sorceress or a Javazon or like any kind of like AoE elemental damage character, you pretty much just don't even care that they're there or that they exist in any way, shape, or form because you fire like one attack and they're gone. Um, so mainly just a melee character problem and mainly only like physical damage melee characters. If you do happen to be like a Holy Fire Paladin, Holy Freeze Paladin, Holy Shock Paladin, any kind of elemental damage paladin running like a Gimmer Shred, a Baronera Star. Honestly, there's like 1,000 weapons that have a decent amount of elemental damage on them, like Crescent Moon, for instance, which comes with Static Field, chance to cast Chain Lightning, which can actually kill them, Open Wounds. There's a lot of ways that you can deal with them where even the melees don't really have too much trouble with them. Another interesting thing about these swarms is that they don't drop weapons and they don't drop armor. There is a list of monsters, if you guys are interested, where basically these monster types are restricted from dropping specific types of equipment. And the Itchies are actually one of these types. Let me see if I can find the full list. The AI program has, popped up with an answer right off the bat. Talks about ghosts, wraiths, specters. There's actually quite a large number of them. Like the Itchies can't drop them, the vultures can't drop weapons and armor. And it's specific to these types of monsters. Usually this means that they drop more runes, but I've actually kind of like done some research on this, and although ghosts do drop more runes because of this restriction, for some reason swarms don't. Swarms tend to actually have a lower rune drop chance than some of the other monsters for some reason or another. There is a full list of all of the like monster types that have restrictions of weapons and armor, and this is one of them. Now, do be aware that if the monster type is an elite, so for instance, if you find an elite swarm or a champion swarm, those exclude from the restriction. So they can drop weapons and armor. It's only the regular monster types that do not drop weapons and armor. It's the same thing with ghosts. So, like, if you go into an area, say like Arcane Sanctuary or something of that nature, and you find ghosts, if the ghosts are normal ghosts with no names, like if they're like this, then they will not drop weapons and armor no matter what. However, if you find a ghost that is named or is a champion of some type, like for instance this one, that worked out so beautifully, they will have a chance to drop weapons and armor because they are elites or champions. And this has to do with just a slight difference in how the TC class on the monsters works. So as you can see, I clearly got a legend sword from the elite, but you would never get a legend sword from the regular monsters. That means that the regular ghosts have a much higher chance of dropping runes than the elite ghosts, essentially. And the same should be true for the swarms, but for some reason is not. And I don't necessarily know why. Maybe there was some type of artificial restriction that was put in place on the swarms to prevent them from dropping runes because they have such low HP and are easy to farm. I don't know. I think that's pretty much it for the swarms, though. I think we've covered just about every high and low point of these particular monster types and how to effectively deal with them if you're having trouble, which most people don't. As always, I'd appreciate you guys and gals joining. Be sure to hit that like button and subscribe button if you are enjoying the Monster Family series. This is my full-time job, so I appreciate any support you're willing to give me. And as always, keep watching.